Marcus Thompson had always been fascinated by the stoic British guards stationed outside Buckingham Palace. As a travel blogger from Chicago, he had visited London countless times over the past 5 years. But something about their unwavering dedication to duty never ceased to amaze him. The guards represented everything he found intriguing about British culture: the tradition, the discipline, the unwavering commitment to service that stretched back centuries. On this particular April morning, the crisp air carried the scent of blooming daffodils as Marcus walked through the bustling streets of Westminster. His professional camera bag slung over his shoulder and his mind already planning the day's content. The cobblestones beneath his feet told stories of centuries past, and the iconic red buses rumbling by reminded him why London had become his favorite city to visit. Marcus had built a reputation for finding the human stories behind tourist attractions, and the guards at Buckingham Palace had always intrigued him as people rather than just ceremonial figures. The idea struck him suddenly as he watched a group of Asian tourists attempting to make the guards laugh or react. They were making funny faces, telling jokes, and trying every trick in the book to get some kind of response. It was April Fool's Day, and Marcus had built his online following by creating harmless pranks that brought genuine joy to people's lives. His YouTube channel, Wandering with Marcus, had over 2 million subscribers who loved his lighthearted approach to travel content, his ability to connect with locals, and his knack for finding humor in cultural differences. He'd never done anything mean-spirited, and today would be no different. Marcus had spent months researching the perfect April Fool's content. He wanted something original, something that would stand out from the thousands of prank videos uploaded every year. The guards seemed like the perfect subjects: professional, serious, but presumably with a sense of humor underneath those stoic exteriors. His plan was simple: create an elaborate but harmless story that would maybe get a small reaction. Film it. Edit it into a fun video that celebrated both American enthusiasm and British reserve. Marcus approached the towering guard, stationed at the main gate with the confidence of someone who had successfully executed dozens of similar pranks around the world. The man stood perfectly still, his red uniform immaculate despite the morning foot traffic, his tall black bearskin hat casting a shadow over his weathered face. The brass buttons on his jacket gleamed in the morning sun, catching the light with every subtle shift of his breathing, and his polished black boots reflected the cobblestones beneath him like mirrors. Marcus had researched these guards extensively during his previous visits and knew they were highly trained soldiers who took their ceremonial duties seriously. But he also believed they would appreciate good-natured humor. The guard's rifle was positioned precisely, his white gloves spotless, and his posture so perfect it seemed almost superhuman. Marcus had read about the rigorous training these soldiers underwent, their military backgrounds, and their dual role as both ceremonial figures and active security personnel. This knowledge made his planned prank feel more like a tribute to their professionalism rather than mockery of it. Setting up his camera discreetly on a nearby ledge, Marcus began what he thought would be a simple, innocent prank. He started telling the guard an elaborate story about being a long-lost relative who had traveled from America to find his family roots. He spoke with genuine enthusiasm about fictional ancestors who supposedly served in the Royal Guards centuries ago, weaving an intricate tale of family heritage and military service that grew more detailed with each sentence. "You know, I never knew about my family's connection to the Royal Guards until last month," Marcus began, his American accent carrying clearly in the morning air. "My grandmother passed away, and when we were cleaning out her house in Chicago, we found these amazing documents hidden in her attic. Turns out, my great-great-grandfather served right here in this very position back in the 1890s. The guard remained motionless, but Marcus noticed something subtle in his eyes. There was a flicker of recognition, perhaps even amusement, though his face remained stone-cold serious. His training was evident in every aspect of his bearing: the way he controlled his breathing, the micro-adjustments he made to maintain perfect posture, the professional alertness that never wavered despite the growing distraction around him, encouraged by what he interpreted as interest. Marcus continued. His performance, pulling out fake documents he had spent hours creating that morning in his hotel room, The papers were complete with official-looking seals, aged parchment, and signatures he had researched and practiced to look authentically Victorian. He had even created a backstory for his fictional ancestor, complete with dates, military campaigns, and personal details that he thought would make the story more believable and entertaining. As Marcus spoke, he noticed other tourists gathering around. Drawn by his animated storytelling and the unusual sight of someone having what appeared to be a serious conversation with one of the famously silent guards, some began recording with their phones, creating a secondary audience that Marcus hadn't anticipated but welcomed. He felt the familiar thrill of entertaining a crowd, the same rush he experienced when his videos went viral and comments poured in from viewers around the world. He described imaginary battles his ancestor had fought alongside the guard's predecessors, creating vivid scenes of courage and brotherhood that never existed but sounded remarkably convincing. Marcus drew on his extensive reading about British military history, incorporating real battles and historical events into his fictional family narrative. The Victorian era, colonial campaigns, the changing of the guard traditions, he wove them all into a tapestry of made-up family lore that impressed even himself with its creativity. The morning sun climbed higher, casting longer shadows across the palace grounds and illuminating the growing crowd of onlookers. Marcus had been talking for nearly 30 minutes, his story becoming more elaborate with each passing minute, when something unexpected happened. The guard, still maintaining his rigid posture and perfect ceremonial stance, spoke in a low, controlled voice that only Marcus could hear clearly. "Sir, might I suggest you step back from the gate area? There are protocols that must be followed, and your story, while entertaining, is causing quite a distraction to the normal flow of visitors." Marcus was thrilled beyond measure. He had gotten a reaction. This was exactly what his viewers loved to see, the moment when his good-natured persistence paid off, and he managed to connect with someone whose job required them to remain impassive. He smiled broadly and continued his charade, not realizing that what he had interpreted as the guard playing along was actually a polite but firm professional warning. The soldier was doing his job, trying to maintain order and security while being respectful to a tourist who seemed harmless enough but was creating an unusual situation. The crowd around them grew larger by the minute. Marcus fed off their energy like a performer on stage. He began embellishing his story even more, claiming that his great-great-grandfather had saved the life of a royal family member during a fictional assassination attempt in 1897. He pulled out more fake documents, including what appeared to be a Medal of Honor crafted from brass and ribbon he had purchased at a costume shop, and an old photograph that he claimed showed his ancestor in uniform, actually a picture he had found online and printed on aged paper. The situation began to shift dramatically when Marcus noticed more guards approaching from different strategic positions around the palace grounds. What he had naively assumed was curiosity about his entertaining family story was actually a coordinated security response that had been building quietly in the background. The original guard, whose name tag read Thompson, an ironic coincidence that Marcus found absolutely delightful and saw as a sign that his prank was destined for success, remained steadfast at his post, but Marcus could sense an undercurrent of tension building in the air around him. The additional guards moved with military precision, their routes calculated, and their positioning strategic rather than casual, which wore the same immaculate red uniform. But Marcus began to notice subtle differences in their insignia and equipment that suggested varying levels of authority and specialized roles. Their coordinated movement was so smooth and professional that most tourists didn't even notice the security response unfolding around Marcus's impromptu performance. A senior officer, distinguished by the additional stripes on his uniform sleeves and the subtle air of command in his bearing, approached the growing crowd with measured steps. His weathered face showed the experience of someone who had dealt with countless tourist situations over many years, both innocent and problematic. The lines around his eyes spoke of decades of service, and his calm demeanor suggested a man who had seen everything from genuine family reunions to elaborate security threats. Marcus, still caught up in the excitement of his prank and the growing audience, greeted the approaching officer enthusiastically. His adrenaline was running high, and he interpreted every new development as evidence that his video was going to be spectacular. He began repeating his elaborate family history story with even more animation and detail, gesturing wildly with his fake documents. "Good morning, officer. What perfect timing," Marcus exclaimed with genuine enthusiasm. "I was just telling your colleague here about my ancestor who served with such distinction in the Royal Guards. Perhaps you knew him?" "Thompson was his name too. What an incredible coincidence. It must be fate that brought me here today to discover this connection." Marcus gestured excitedly at his collection of fake documents, completely missing the increasingly serious expressions on the faces around him. The crowd of tourists had grown to nearly 50 people, all watching with fascination as what appeared to be a heartwarming family discovery unfolded before their eyes. Many were recording the scene, already planning to share this touching story of American heritage and British military tradition on their social media accounts. The senior officer, Sergeant Williams, according to his nameplate, examined Marcus's demeanor, and the crowd that had formed with the trained eye of a security professional. Ad's years of experience had taught him to distinguish between harmless tourists and potential security concerns, and he had developed an almost intuitive ability to read situations and people. While Marcus seemed friendly and well-intentioned, clearly excited about what he believed to be a genuine family discovery, the situation was escalating beyond normal tourist interaction parameters. The documents Marcus was displaying, though, obviously fake to anyone with proper military training, were causing confusion among onlookers who were starting to take the story seriously. Some tourists were asking their own questions about the supposed family history, and others were making comments about the amazing coincidence of finding a guard with the same surname. The situation was developing its own momentum, independent of Marcus's original intentions. "Sir, I'm going to need you to come with me for a moment," Sergeant Williams said calmly, but with unmistakable authority. "There are some questions about your documentation that need to be clarified through proper channels." Marcus laughed heartily, thinking this was all part of the wonderful British bureaucratic process he had heard about. "Oh, you want to verify the family records through official channels? Of course, I completely understand the need for proper verification when dealing with military heritage. This is so exciting. I never expected to get such a thorough and official response to my family research." His enthusiasm was genuine and infectious, and several tourists in the crowd murmured their approval of what they saw as proper British thoroughness in handling historical family connections. The crowd had become invested in Marcus's story, and many were expressing disappointment that they might not see the conclusion of what promised to be a heartwarming reunion. As Marcus was gently but firmly guided away from the main gate area, he continued chatting enthusiastically about his fictional family history, completely oblivious to the serious implications of his situation. He thanked the guards profusely for their patience and professionalism, praising their dedication to helping tourists understand British military traditions and family connections. "You know, this is exactly why I love British culture so much," Marcus continued as they walked. "The respect for history, the attention to detail, the proper way of doing things. My viewers are going to be absolutely amazed by how professional and thorough you all are. This is going to be one of my best videos ever." In his mind, this was turning into the most successful and elaborate prank video he had ever created. The official response, the multiple guards, the formal procedures, it all added to what he saw as the authentic British experience his audience craved. The guard named Thompson remained at his assigned post, but Marcus caught him glancing in their direction during the brief moments when protocol allowed. There was something in that look that Marcus couldn't quite interpret but found encouraging. Was it concern for a fellow Thompson? Amusement at the situation? Professional interest in the outcome? The expression was so subtle that Marcus convinced himself it was admiration for his creative approach to family research. Inside a small security office adjacent to the palace grounds, Marcus found himself in a clean, austere room that spoke of serious official business. The walls were decorated with formal portraits of the royal family, military commendations, and official notices that created an atmosphere of gravity and importance. The furniture was functional rather than comfortable metal desks, filing cabinets, and chairs that suggested this was a working office rather than a reception area. Sergeant Williams offered him tea and biscuits with the practiced courtesy of British hospitality, a gesture that Marcus interpreted as confirmation of the warm welcome he had expected rather then recognizing it as standard protocol for dealing with potentially problematic situations. The tea service was proper bone china, and the biscuits were arranged on a small plate with military precision. Now then, Sergeant Williams began, settling into his chair with practiced ease and opening a folder that appeared to contain official forms. I'd like you to tell me more about these family documents you've brought with you today. Please start from the beginning and explain how you came to possess them and what you hope to accomplish with your visit. Marcus beamed with pride as he carefully spread his fake papers across the polished desk surface. Treating them with the reverence he thought they deserved, he had spent hours creating them in his hotel room, using tea stains to age the paper, researching historical military terminology online, and practicing period-appropriate handwriting. To him, they were elaborate props for entertainment. The security team. They were potential evidence of document fraud or a more serious security concern that required thorough investigation. Sergeant Williams examined the documents with the trained eye of someone who had seen countless forgeries and authentic historical papers throughout his military career. His experience with historical military records was extensive, having worked closely with the Royal Archives and various military historians over his many years of service. The craftsmanship of Marcus's fake documents was actually quite impressive for someone with no professional training in document creation, showing attention to detail that suggested considerable effort and research. However, several critical details immediately stood out as problematic to his expert examination. The paper, while cleverly aged, using what appeared to be tea stains and careful weathering techniques, showed signs of artificial treatment that were obvious under proper lighting. In close inspection, the aging process had been rushed and didn't match the natural deterioration patterns that would occur over more than a century. The ink, though designed to look old and faded, had a modern chemical composition that was visible when examined. With the small UV light that Williams kept in his desk drawer for exactly these situations, most concerning to Williams were the historical inaccuracies in military ranks, terminology, and procedural references that would be immediately obvious to anyone with real knowledge of British military history from the late 1800s. The fictional ancestors' supposed rank progression didn't follow proper military protocols of the era, and several of the commendations mentioned didn't exist during the time period specified in the documents. Additionally, the language used in the supposed official correspondence was too modern, lacking the formal Victorian military prose that would have been standard for that period. These are quite interesting documents, Mr. Thompson. Sergeant, Williams said carefully, his tone measured and professional. However, I'm afraid there are some significant inconsistencies that we need to discuss in greater detail. Marcus nodded eagerly, completely misinterpreting the sergeant's careful tone as professional curiosity rather than suspicion. His excitement was palpable, and he leaned forward in his chair like a student eager to learn from a teacher. Oh, yes. I know some of the details might seem unusual to someone who hasn't seen these specific family records before. Family stories get mixed up over generations, don't they? Details change in the telling and retelling, but the essential facts are all there. The service record, commendations, the clear family lineage connecting me to this place. Outside the office, Marcus's impromptu performance had created a ripple effect that extended far beyond what he had anticipated when he first approached the palace gates that morning. Word had spread through the tourist crowd like wildfire that an American had discovered his Royal Guard ancestry. The story was being shared on social media platforms in real time with remarkable speed and enthusiasm. Videos of Marcus presenting his documents were already being posted with captions like, "American finds his Royal Guard ancestor at Buckingham Palace. An incredible family discovery unfolds in London." The posts were gaining traction rapidly, with shares, likes, comments pouring in from viewers around the world who were touched by what appeared to be a genuine moment of family heritage discovery. Several travel bloggers who had been at the palace that morning had captured different angles of Marcus's performance, and they were already editing their footage for upload to various social media platforms. The story was developing its own momentum in the digital world, completely independent of the reality of the situation unfolding in the security office. The original guard, Thompson, had been quietly observing the entire situation during his brief scheduled rest periods, when protocol allowed him to step slightly away from his rigid ceremonial position. Unlike Marcus, who remained blissfully unaware of the serious implications, Thompson understood immediately the gravity of presenting false military documents at a royal residence. Even if done as a prank or entertainment, Thompson also recognized something that had escaped everyone else's attention. Marcus seemed genuinely unaware of the potential legal consequences of his actions. There was an innocence and enthusiasm in the American's demeanor that suggested he truly believed this was harmless fun rather than a potential security incident. This observation reminded Thompson of his own father, who had served in the military during the Falklands War and always spoke with deep pride about family traditions, military honor, and the importance of respecting those who serve their country. Back in the security office, the questioning had taken a noticeably more serious turn with the arrival of Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell, who had been called in to assist with what was now being treated as a potential case of document fraud. Her experience with international tourists and security concerns at sensitive locations had taught her to approach these situations with both caution and cultural understanding, recognizing that what might seem like obvious deception could sometimes be the result of cultural misunderstandings or innocent mistakes. Detective Inspector Mitchell had reviewed hundreds of cases involving false documents. From simple tourist pranks to elaborate international fraud schemes, her trained eye could usually distinguish between malicious intent and misguided humor within minutes of beginning an investigation. She carried herself with quiet authority, her questions precise and her observations sharp. "Mr. Thompson," she began, her tone professional but not unkind, settling into her chair across from Marcus with a folder of official forms. "I need to understand your intentions with these documents. Are you claiming these are genuine historical records that prove your family connection to the Royal Guards?" For the first time since starting his elaborate April Fool's prank that morning, Marcus began to sense that the situation was significantly more serious than he had ever intended or imagined. The detective's formal questions, the official setting with its portraits and certificates, and the careful way everyone was handling his fake papers made him realize that his harmless joke might have crossed a line he hadn't known existed. Weight of official scrutiny was beginning to penetrate his enthusiasm, and a cold feeling started settling in his stomach. This wasn't the light-hearted reaction he had expected from his usual travel pranks. The room felt smaller, more serious, and the smiles he had been receiving from the guards and officials now seemed more professional than genuinely amused. "Well, I mean, they're family documents," Marcus stammered, his confident storytelling beginning to falter for the first time that day. "I brought them to share the story of my ancestor's service and to see where he might have worked." Detective Inspector Mitchell noted the subtle but significant change in Marcus's demeanor with professional interest. His earlier enthusiasm was giving way to nervousness, and his answers were becoming less specific and more evasive. This behavioral pattern was consistent with someone who was either deliberately lying or beginning to realize they were in more trouble than they had anticipated. Confident travel blogger who had approached the palace gates that morning with a camera and a plan for entertaining content was slowly being replaced by someone who was starting to understand that his actions might have real-world consequences beyond social media views and subscriber engagement. The revelation came suddenly and with crushing weight. Marcus looked across the desk at Detective Inspector Mitchell and Sergeant Williams, their serious expressions finally penetrating through his enthusiasm and false confidence. He glanced down at his carefully crafted fake document spread across the polished surface, then back up at the official portraits on the walls, and finally understood the full gravity of his situation. "This was an April Fool's prank," he said quietly. "Yes." His voice barely above a whisper, the words seeming to echo in the suddenly silent room. "I'm a travel blogger. Make videos about fun interactions with people around the world. I never meant for this to become a police matter. I never thought. I just wanted to create something entertaining for my audience." The silence that followed was deafening and seemed to stretch on forever. Detective Inspector Mitchell exchanged meaningful glances with Sergeant Williams. both processing this confession with the professional composure that comes from years of dealing with unusual situations. What had been treated as potential document fraud and a possible security threat was indeed a prank, but one that had spiraled far beyond its creator's intentions or understanding. The weight of this admission hung heavy in the air. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat, the quiet ticking of a wall clock, and the distant sounds of London traffic filtering through the windows. Everything that had seemed so exciting and entertaining just hours earlier now felt foolish and potentially criminal. "Mr. Thompson," Detective Inspector Mitchell said carefully, leaning forward in her chair with the serious demeanor of someone who had dealt with countless cases of poor judgment. "Presenting false documents at a royal residence, even as a prank, is a serious matter under British law. We need to understand the full scope of what you've done, your motivations, and why you thought this would be appropriate behavior at one of the most secure locations in the United Kingdom." Marcus felt his stomach drop as if he were on a roller coaster that had just begun its steepest descent. The reality of his situation hit him like a physical blow, cold, hard, and undeniable. In his eagerness to create entertaining content for his YouTube channel, he had failed completely to consider the security implications of his actions, the legal ramifications of presenting false documents, or the professional responsibilities of the people he had chosen as unwitting participants in his prank. The guards weren't just ceremonial figures standing around for tourist photos. They were active military personnel responsible for protecting one of the most important and historically significant sites in Britain. They dealt with real security threats, international incidents, and the constant responsibility of safeguarding members of the royal family and visiting dignitaries. "I have videos on my phone showing me making the documents this morning in my hotel room," Marcus offered desperately, pulling out his smartphone with shaking hands. "I can prove this was just meant to be harmless fun. I've been doing travel pranks for years, visiting dozens of countries and creating content that brings people joy. I've never done anything that would hurt anyone or cause real problems. It was supposed to be just another light-hearted cultural exchange." His voice cracked with emotion as the full implications of his actions became clear. The confident travel blogger who had approached the palace that morning was gone, replaced by someone who was beginning to understand how his pursuit of entertaining content had led him into a serious legal and diplomatic situation. As the investigation continued throughout the afternoon, word of the situation reached Guard Thompson through the military communication network that connected all personnel at the palace. Learning that the American tourist's elaborate and convincing story had been nothing more than an April Fool's prank created a complex mix of emotions that he found difficult to process. On one hand, Thompson felt somewhat foolish for having been taken in by the performance, even briefly. His military training had taught him to be suspicious of unusual situations, and he wondered if he should have recognized the deception earlier. The American had been so convincing, so enthusiastic, and so knowledgeable about military history that Thompson had found himself almost believing parts of the story, despite his professional skepticism. On the other hand, he recognized that Marcus had never been malicious or threatening in any way. There had been no attempt to gain unauthorized access. The revelation came suddenly and painfully. Marcus looked at Detective Inspector Mitchell and Sergeant Williams, then down at his carefully crafted fake documents, and finally understood the gravity of his situation. "This was an April Fool's prank," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm a travel blogger. I make videos about fun interactions with people around the world. I never meant for this to become a police matter." The silence in the room was deafening. Detective Inspector Mitchell exchanged glances with Sergeant Williams, both processing this confession. What had been treated as potential document fraud was indeed a prank, but one that had spiraled far beyond its creator's intentions. "Mr. Thompson," Detective Inspector Mitchell said carefully, "presenting false documents at a royal residence, even as a prank, is a serious matter. We need to understand the full scope of what you've done and why you thought this was appropriate." Marcus felt his stomach drop. The reality of his situation hit him like a cold wave. In his eagerness to create entertaining content, he had failed to consider the security implications of his actions. The guards weren't just ceremonial figures. They were active military personnel, responsible for protecting one of the most important sites in Britain. "I have videos on my phone showing me making the documents this morning," Marcus offered desperately. "I can prove this was just meant to be harmless fun. I've been doing travel pranks for years, but never anything that would hurt anyone or cause real problems." As the investigation continued, word reached Guard Thompson through the military communication network. Learning that the American tourist's elaborate story had been a prank created a complex mix of emotions. On one hand, he felt somewhat foolish for having been taken in by the performance, even briefly. On the other hand, he recognized that Marcus had never been malicious or threatening, just misguided in his approach to entertainment. The situation outside had also evolved dramatically. Social media posts about the American descendant had gone viral, with thousands of shares and comments from people around the world who were touched by the story of someone discovering their military heritage. The truth about it being a prank would soon follow. But the damage to both Marcus's reputation and the dignity of the Royal Guard was already spreading across the internet. Detective Inspector Mitchell reviewed Marcus's phone, finding extensive evidence that this was indeed a planned prank video. His YouTube channel showed a clear pattern of harmless tourist interactions, and the timestamps on his video footage confirmed that he had created the documents that morning with the intention of filming a reaction video. The intent appears to have been entertainment rather than malicious fraud, she concluded after her review. However, the execution was extremely poor judgment, especially given the location and the security implications. Marcus sat in stunned silence as the full consequences of his actions became clear. What he had intended as a 10-minute funny video had become an international incident that would require formal documentation, potential legal consequences, and had already embarrassed both himself and the professional soldiers he had tried to prank. The irony wasn't lost on him that his YouTube channel was called Wandering with Marcus and featured his tagline, "Bringing joy to the world, one smile at a time." Today, he had brought stress, confusion, professional complications to people who were simply doing their jobs with honor and dedication. "What happens now?" Marcus asked, his voice small and defeated. The confident travel blogger who had approached the palace that morning was gone, replaced by someone who was beginning to understand the real-world consequences of treating serious institutions as props for entertainment. Sergeant Williams, who had been quietly observing Marcus throughout the questioning, spoke up. "That depends on several factors, Mr. Thompson. Your cooperation, your willingness to make this right, and the assessment of whether this was truly misguided humor rather than something more concerning." What happened next surprised everyone, especially Marcus. Guard Thompson, who had been the unwitting target of the prank, requested permission to speak with the American tourist. This was highly unusual, but given the unique circumstances, Sergeant Williams agreed to allow a brief, supervised conversation. When Thompson entered the office, still in his full ceremonial uniform, Marcus immediately stood up with a mixture of shame and respect. "I'm so sorry," Marcus began before Thompson could speak. "I never meant to disrespect you or your service. I thought I was just making a fun video, but I realize now how stupid and inconsiderate that was." Thompson studied Marcus for a long moment, taking in his obvious distress and genuine remorse. "Mr. Thompson," he said, noting the shared surname with a slight smile, "I've been thinking about your story while I was at my post." Marcus looked confused. "My story? But it was all fake. It's made up. None of it was true. The details were fabricated." "Yes," Thompson agreed. "But the respect you showed for military service, the pride you expressed in family heritage, and the way you spoke about honor and duty, those emotions seemed quite real to me." This unexpected response caught Marcus completely off guard. He had been prepared for anger, official reprimands, and serious consequences. He hadn't expected understanding or philosophical reflection from the man he had tried to fool. "I've been a guard here for 8 years, Thompson continued. "I've seen thousands of tourists, and most of them see us as living statues or tourist attractions. But when you were telling your story, even though it was made up, you spoke about military service with genuine admiration. That meant something to me." Detective Inspector Mitchell and Sergeant Williams watched this unusual exchange with professional interest. They had seen many cases of tourist pranks gone wrong, but never one where the victim was offering perspective and understanding to the perpetrator. Marcus felt tears welling up in his eyes. The grace and dignity that Thompson was showing in this moment made his prank seem even more inappropriate and childish. "I don't deserve your understanding," Marcus said quietly. "I used you and your colleagues as props for entertainment without thinking about you as real people with feelings and professional responsibilities." "That's exactly why this conversation is important," Thompson replied. "You've learned something today that you couldn't have learned from a successful prank video. You've learned about consequences, respect, and the difference between harmless fun and actions that affect real people in real ways." The room fell quiet as everyone processed Thompson's words. Even Detective Inspector Mitchell, who had dealt with countless cases involving poor judgment and pranks gone wrong, was moved by the guard's mature and thoughtful response to the situation. "What would you like me to do to make this right?" Marcus asked, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll delete all the footage, make a public apology, donate to military charities, whatever it takes to show that I understand how wrong this was." Thompson exchanged glances with Sergeant Williams before responding. "I think the most important thing is that you use this experience to help others understand why respect matters, especially when it comes to people who serve their country." The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, with Thompson sharing stories about his military service, his family's history with the guards, and his perspective on the difference between tourists who see guards as people versus those who see them as objects of entertainment. Marcus listened intently, recording nothing, just absorbing the wisdom and perspective of someone whose profession he had thoughtlessly exploited for content. By the end of their conversation, remarkable had happened. What had begun as a prank investigation had become an educational experience for everyone involved. Marcus had gained a deep appreciation for military service and the importance of treating all people with dignity. Thompson had found an opportunity to share his perspective and help someone learn from their mistakes rather than simply being punished for them. The resolution of Marcus's situation was as unexpected as the rest of his day had been. After extensive discussions between Detective Inspector Mitchell, Sergeant Williams, and Palace security officials, a decision was reached that reflected both the seriousness of his actions and the genuine remorse he had shown. Marcus would face formal consequences: a significant fine, mandatory community service with veterans organizations, and a permanent record of the incident that would affect any future visits to royal properties. However, the most impactful consequence was one he chose for himself: a complete transformation of his approach to content creation. 3 months later, Marcus published a video on his YouTube channel that would become one of his most viewed and meaningful pieces of content. Titled "The Day I Learned What Respect Really Means," it featured his honest account of the failed prank, his conversation with Guard Thompson, the lessons he had learned about treating people with dignity rather than as entertainment props. The video wasn't monetized. Instead, Marcus used it to raise funds for military family support organizations, and he included interviews with veterans who shared their perspectives on service, sacrifice, and the importance of public respect for those in uniform. The response from his audience was overwhelmingly positive, with many viewers commenting that they had also learned something important about respect and consequences. Guard Thompson, who had given permission for Marcus to share their conversation, watched the video from his quarters. He was proud to see that the young American had truly learned from the experience and was using his platform to educate others rather than simply to entertain them. The relationship between Marcus and Thompson evolved into an unexpected friendship. Conducted through email correspondence, Thompson shared stories about his military service and British history, while Marcus provided perspectives on American culture and his travels around the world. What had begun as a thoughtless prank had become a meaningful connection between two people from different worlds. Marcus's content creation style changed permanently after the incident. His channel still featured travel adventures and cultural exchanges, but with a new focus on genuine respect for the people and places he visited. He developed a reputation for thoughtful, educational content that celebrated different cultures rather than exploiting them for cheap laughs. the incident also had a broader impact on social media culture. Other content creators began discussing the importance of considering the real-world consequences of their pranks and the need to treat all people with dignity, regardless of their profession or role in society. Marcus became an inadvertent spokesperson for responsible content creation. A year later, Marcus returned to London for legitimate travel content creation. He visited Buckingham Palace again, but this time with proper permissions and a completely different approach. He created a documentary-style video about the history and significance of the Royal Guards, featuring interviews with military historians and respectful observations of the ceremonial duties. When Marcus approached the palace gates that day, Guard Thompson was not on duty. But word had spread among the guards about the American blogger who had learned an important lesson about respect. The current guard on duty, who had heard the story, gave Marcus a barely perceptible nod of acknowledgement, not breaking protocol, but recognizing someone who had learned to approach their service with appropriate dignity. Marcus's final reflection on the experience, shared in a follow-up video, captured the essence of what he had learned. Sometimes the best content isn't about getting reactions or going viral. Sometimes it's about learning something important about yourself and sharing that growth with others. My failed prank taught me more about respect, consequences, and genuine human connection than any successful video ever had. The story of Marcus's April Fool's prank gone wrong became a teaching moment that extended far beyond a single YouTube channel, demonstrating that even our mistakes can become opportunities for growth, understanding, and positive change when we approach them with honesty, humility, and a willingness to learn.